It is my honor and my pleasure to introduce you this afternoon to Brian Mork, M-O-R-K, like he said, from Mork and Mindy. Mr. Mork is the Chief Information Security Officer for Celanese, where he acts as a senior level executive, reporting to the Chief Information Officer and leading the strategy and operations of information and systems security. His areas of responsibility include the Security Operations Center, SAP, Security, Global Security Architecture, Industrial Control Systems, Security Architecture and Governance, and the firewalls. He is responsible for establishing and maintaining an enterprise-wide information security program to ensure that data information assets are adequately protected. Responsible for identifying, evaluating, and reporting on information security risk in a manner that meets company needs, company's compliance, and regulatory requirements. Mr. Mork oversees our technology risk management activities and acts as an advocate for all information security and business continuance best practices. Please help me welcome Brian Mork.
All right, that sounded really formal, didn't it? That's not me at all. So let's jump right into it. This is a brief history of cryptographic failures. I'm Brian Mork, and I really can't believe this many people showed up for this particular talk, so thank you for your time. So who am I? I am a CISO at S&P 500, Fortune 500 company, lots of fancy words, ignore that stuff. I'm a former airdrop hacker, security engineer, penetration tester, RF simulation engineer, electronics intelligence, a whole bunch of other stuff. I've made my entire career showing up in places where things are broken and fixing them. That's really what I am. At the end of the day, if you choose one word, hacker is pretty much it. And I love what I get to do. And I'm also known as Hermit within the information security community here in Dallas and otherwhere. So if you ever see that, that's me as well. So, a few disclaimers. I am not an expert in cryptography. Let me repeat that. I am not an expert in cryptography. If you're looking for Bruce Schneier, he's not here. Wish he was. He'd have a great talk. I take cryptography seriously, though. I don't take myself seriously. So if you feel the need to heckle, please heckle. Let's talk. Let's engage. Thank you. All right, I owe you a drink. Let me know. I've used pictures from the internet. That's pretty critical. I saw Andy did the same thing, so thank you, Andy. I've listed the sources on the second to last slide for the ones I know. I didn't know all of them. I'm a bad researcher. And if we can't have fun of this, you're going to have a bad time. Because let's be fair, cryptography isn't a really entertaining subject when you really dive into it, unless you just love geeking out on math, in which case you're in the right building. So, things I want to talk about. What is cryptography? Why do we do cryptography? The people we're going to use to talk about cryptography. The failures, honorable mentions, and Q&A, because I'm sure everyone has a lot of interesting questions about crypto. So anyone, what is cryptography? None of you know. Okay, great. Well, you're in the right place. So cryptography is the process of writing or reading secret messages or codes according to Merriam-Webster. I disagree. That's complete BS. Let's move on. It's the art of writing or solving codes, Oxford English Dictionary. Yeah, still BS. I don't believe that. Next up. Scientific field study related to protecting or verifying information. That one I do believe. I think that's a very reputable source. Who said? Oh, me. Yeah. Okay. So that is definitely the way you should go. That third one, those other guys, they're amateurs. Trust me. It's the last one. Why cryptography? Why do we use crypto? Anybody? Because we don't trust transmission mediums. You know, you're browsing to your favorite site to download that pornography client that Andy was talking about. You know, get some great stuff there. You want to make sure you receive it securely. You don't want anyone tampering with the malware. Maybe we don't trust the integrity of communications. So that MD5 hash he was talking about, we want to make sure that we know that what we've downloaded is what we've downloaded. Cryptography provides the tools to do that. Other people. How do I know that you are who you say you are on the internet when you could be around the world and we've never physically met? Do I go by some basis of communication? Do I look at how you communicate and just trust that? Cryptography provides a much more secure way. Governments? Who here trusts every government out there? Oh, wait, we do have one. Excellent, thank you. I spotted the Fed. Someone give me my T-shirt. Or cigarette-smoking men. Trust no one. Cryptography is the basis for trust. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in our cast, if we're normally talking about cryptography, we'd have a few key actors. We'd have Alice, someone sending information. We'd have Bob, someone who's receiving information. We'd have Eve, someone who is eavesdropping. Haha, very funny. Anyone know where that came from? Wow, very interactive audience, thank you. It's all because Ron Rivest, the gentleman who is one of 3 people who created RSA fame, used these terms back in the 1970s, and everyone just said, that Ron guy's a smart guy, let's go with that. So that's how we have Alice, Bob, and Eve today. But times have changed, and we need heroes to reflect those times. So I'm proposing a different cast that we'll be using for today's discussion. The first of those is Alice. You know? She seemed pretty appropriate to me. I had the right name and everything, and honestly, I couldn't come up with anyone else aside from a restaurant owner who would fit that description. But if it's Alice, we have to have Dilbert. Seems like a good general Bob name, everyman IT, so we'll be using Dilbert in place of Bob. And if we have Alice and we have Dilbert, who do we have to have for the third? Catbert, as Eve or Evil, either one, both. I like his sense of style. So, now here's something we hope you'll really like. Throughout this, we're going to talk about 3 major failures, just to level set a little bit here. And those failures are going to go from what I'm going to call the regular failure, just a standard run-of-the-mill failure. And we'll go on to something a little bit more egregious, and then something that's just completely impressive. So this is my favorite Windows error. It's an error on the blue screen of death. Pretty rare. You can trigger it, but how often do you get to see an error on an error? So here's our scenario. Alice and Dilbert have set up a secure website. It's amazing. It's hacker-proof. I know that for a fact because the table over there, I hired them to take care of it, and they couldn't get in. If they can't get in, no one can. Had an official certificate and everything, issued by a third party. The problem was this was back in the mid-2000s. Their agents used browsers that still trusted some root certificates, and those authorities used MD5 for the hashing. Before we go any further, does everyone here know how certificates work? You know? Okay, great. Would you explain to everybody, please?
I don't take myself seriously.
Good answer. I don't either. Okay, so you trust something, and you can trust it because there's some integrity mechanisms, and that's all we're going to go into for the purpose of this, unless anyone really wants to know more, in which case I'll teach a whole class on it. It's fun. So, what is MD5? It's a hashing algorithm. It's vulnerable to collisions. It was still used through 2008 by certificate authorities. Vulnerable to collisions. That doesn't sound great. What's a collision? What's that? That's right. Give the man a drink. It's 2 things that, when passed through the algorithm, generate the same end result. Or 2 different inputs create the same output. That's really bad when you want to talk about integrity. You don't want 2 things giving you the exact same output. And so every time we look at new crypto systems and look at new hashing algorithms, what we're really looking for is how long will it be before 2 different things can create the same result. And that's the susceptibility to collision. MD5 was great on early computing hardware, met the need until we got into using it for pretty much everything. Oops, got a little ahead of myself. And that's really bad because that's exactly what they're not supposed to do. So we reached a point where you could actually create a collision on MD5s. So how can we make that worse? What's worse than 2 different inputs creating the same output when we want to trust that's how we verify something is what we say it is? What's worse than that? No one? How about where they share the same function or format? Like documents or executables. What if I can make 2 documents that have the exact same hash? Or I can make 2 executables that have the exact same hash. Now it's not even just random thing A and random thing B. Now I can make 2 things that share a feature come out exactly the same. That's getting into the really bad category. Like cryptographic material. If you have cryptographic material that you can make look the same, even though it's two different things, that's really, really expletives deleted bad. So let's talk about MD5 collisions for a moment. The very first one was in 2004. First documented, known, proved case of an MD5 collision. Within 3 years, we could collide executables, documents, and other things due to what's called a chosen prefix collision. And a chosen prefix, that means we can take a giant chunk of stuff, make it whatever the heck we want, modify a little piece, and then we can make the end result still come out the same. That's a really technical explanation. If anyone has any questions, again, Bruce Schneier. So with that, we can create a fake certificate authority, which means we can issue certificates for whatever the heck we want. And so that's exactly what happened. Step one, we generate a pair of certificates with the same hash, but everything else is different. So maybe one of those we make for a website, my ultra secret super duper website.com, and the other one we make a certificate authority. It can sign anything, it can vouch for anything. That's one of those generally bad things you don't want out there and everyone trusting. So then we get that fake one signed by a real CA. And we copy that signature over so that whenever anyone checks it, the hashes check out, the certificate checks out, the signature checks out, everything's fine. And we then use our fake one that has the same hash to now have a globally signing certificate authority. And now we are Google, we are Apple, we are Andy's personal website, etc. So this is exactly what happened. And this is about the best way I could find to describe that, is Dilbert shows up, thinks that, there's going to be a costume ball. Everyone's going to change. Everyone's going to wear something different. He spends a lot of time creating his. And at the end, it turns out that they actually had done it, but he couldn't tell the difference. That's exactly what just happened. We have certificate authorities that could be issued, that would be trusted by major browsers, and no one knew the difference. Until you actually went down and started examining the individual details of those, which are the things you should never have to actually examine, you had no way of identifying it. All the automated systems would pass it. Mesdames et messieurs, I present the very first massive cryptographic failure. And this is the basic one. This is the easy one. Yeah. I like that music. It's not me. I'm going to need a lot more money if I'm going to start dancing. Just want to put that out there. So, as I said, that gives you a certificate where you can be anyone, anything, as far as all those browsers are concerned. By the way, I am Mr. Robot. So, this is the end state. We have Eve, or Dilbert in this case, saying, you can trust me because Alice said you can trust me. Alice, in this case, being a major certificate authority. Tell me all your secrets, they're safe. And every one of the browsers would do so. So, failure 2. We've moved on from regular failure to epic failure. When a beaver gets killed by cutting down a log that falls on and breaks its own neck, that's pretty epic. All right, so in this case, we've got an alternate dimension. Alice is ascended. She's leading a military force against the evil feline nation of Capverdia. That's a completely real thing. You can look it up. Dilbert is her lead general. He needs to communicate securely with her. Pretty standard case. So they're going to deploy one of the most effective physical cryptographic systems ever made, which is the enigmatic Enigma. You guys have heard of this one, yes? Made a whole movie about it, a couple. So this is the Enigma, and I say this with complete reverence. It's a beauty of engineering. It's an amazing device. If you take a look at what it was doing and when it was doing it and the capabilities of it, there's no way this system should have failed. The system itself was well designed, was well executed, was effective. It's awesome. So let's talk about how awesome it was. There were 3 rotor wheel positions, so 3 different places you could place a rotor. And of those, you had 5 wheels you could choose to put into those positions. So the first one you had 5 choices, the second one you had 4, then you had 3. So 60 starting combinations, just to start. Then you have 26 starting combinations per wheel, because each of those rotors contains 26 letters, so that gives you 17,576 starting combinations. You might be thinking, okay, that's not too bad, 1920s. But then the wheeltails rotate one another, and you can do wiring to make substitutions, and you can have the wheels changing their position or not changing their position Holy shnikes, that's a lot. I mean, that's a really, 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 really lot. Like, that's, drink a lot. So, and then there was the fact that Enigma operations used key encrypting keys. So it wasn't even just that initial starting position and everything. The messages themselves weren't even encrypted with that. You started and decrypted the thing that you used to decrypt it. I mean, this is cool. So, does anyone know what a key encrypting key is? I suppose I should have backed up. A key encrypting key is basically a one-time transient that you use, and you say, all right, use your known shared secret or your known method, decrypt this first little bit. Now use that thing you just decrypted to decrypt everything else. So that even if you compromise the initial system, it doesn't give you a full compromise. And it also makes it really a lot harder to break things. It's just painful. So there was a day key, and a day key was pre-shared. Everyone knew what the day key was. And so, of course, the Allies knew what the day key was. They were able to break that through spies, etc. And that was used to encrypt one-time keys called message keys. Then the message keys encrypted the actual messages. Pretty decent system. Nifty, even. So Catbird has no chance. It's absolutely logically improbable, if not impossible, for that many combinations, that frequency of change. The Empire of Evil is done. Catbirdia is sunk. Let's just move on. But people. We have people involved in this system. And people make mistakes. But Alice and Dilbert won't, right? They won't make the same mistakes the historical predecessors did. Like maybe reusing the rotor settings over and over. Or doing the same key for multiple transmissions, meaning that each time you're using the exact same material, you break one, you break a bunch. Or using the same message key multiple times. So maybe a particular operator has a girlfriend whose initials are CIL, and they use CIL as their message key every single time. Because it's easier, because everything's already there, it's already set up, they don't have to spend time on it, which, by the way, is where the name Sillies came from, if anyone's ever heard of that. Sillies is the reuse of the same key over and over again. Common message formats, a little bit inaccurate in terms of historical properties, but if anyone's ever seen The Imitation Game, at the end, Benedict Cumberbatch's character, well, Alan Turing, makes the exclamation, all you need to defeat Enigma is a Heil Hitler. And that's somewhat true. So the common message formats, knowing how things were going to come out, knowing what the message was and how it should look when it came out, allowed you to break things because you were sending the same known feature. It allowed you to predict what you should see. Yes, I can. Sorry, thank you. So all right, so we'll go back to the beginning. Does that work? Yeah. But the common message formats allowed people to say, when I get a potential decryption, does this match up to what I'm expecting? And so that made it a lot easier to go through in a brute force method and reduce the number of things a human had to take a look at. So Dilbert has taken using the day of the week as the message key. Now, at first, you're going to have to spend some time brute forcing this, but once you recognize the pattern, it gets really, really easy. And now you get to Alice and her Fist of Death. So let's talk about a legendary fail. Epic fails are good, fails are better. Or sorry, fails are good, epic fails are better. Legendary fails are driving a convertible, following a set of porta potties that are way too tall for that overpass. You're gonna have a bad time. So let's talk about Alice and Dilbert again. They're in the modern age now. They go to each other's houses. They use each other's wireless networks. They want to talk and communicate securely. To be extra safe, they've chosen wired equivalent privacy. It's wired, it's equivalent, it's got to be great. Everyone knows you can't do anything like a vampire tapping wires anyways to secure the network, and so what could possibly go wrong? Well, WEP does use a single key that needs to be protected. So, problem solved. We'll go out in the middle of Elbonia. We're going to go way out there, pay a driver to take them out in the middle of the mud, choose a super secret password, incredibly complex. They bring it back. Okay, everything's good. Yep. Maybe not quite that. So WEP was, within the cryptographic community, possibly the best joke that was ever played on the population, or the worst, depending on how you look at it. So it had poor initialization vector size. All right, math geeks, anyone know what initialization vector is? No? Think about like a little chunk of numbers, a little pre-selection you use to determine how you're going to encrypt things going forward. That's the shortest way I can describe it, and we'll go into a little bit more. It had weak initialization vectors. Turns out that there was about 1,500 of these things that you could just guess. If you came across them, you could decrypt in no time, and they were being used. So not only do we have not many of them, a chunk of them are really bad. And there was a weak key space. So even once we get past the weak startup period and the weak way you do it, there wasn't really a lot of information being used to encrypt. And the less you use to encrypt, the easier it is to exhaust that entire space. Another not great choice. There was poor key entry. So going back to that human error, people didn't want to type in ASCII characters and numbers. They wanted to type in words. Well, what happened was when you switched your, what originally was an ASCII sequence, and then you put it, or what originally was a hexadecimal sequence, and you dropped it down to words, you actually cut the key space in half again. So we've got a tiny key space that's now cut in half. Yeah, and then it turns out that if you want to brute force it, you need some of those IVs. But it also turns out that if you need more IVs, you just ask for them. And the system, by design, would spit out even more of them. And chop-chop attack, which is my personal favorite cryptographic attack. As Catbert would say, the only thing I like more than weak crypto is my enemies using it. Will I ever shut up? No. Let's go back and talk about WEP. In particular, let's talk about the chop-chop attack. So the chop-chop attack was an absolutely brilliant bit of engineering. And in short, what it meant was that there was always a way to take a known capture, slice off a little piece of it, correct the checksums, and then submit it back and say, hey, is this right? And the wireless network would tell you, yeah, that's right, or no, that's wrong. And so you could keep doing that until you got the first byte, then you chop off another byte, and you try it again. You chop off another byte, and you try it again. Eventually, you got the whole darn thing. So for all these reasons, the average time to decrypt WEP right now, walking into an average transmission network, is less than a minute. A minute. That's what's protecting everything. So, yeah, I will eventually shut up. A couple of honorable mentions. Advanced Encryption Standard, and in particular anything using an electronic code book. Definitely should have made the list. I wanted to talk about it more in depth, but this one takes a little bit of explaining. The very short version is that the same key is used over and over. So if you chop up your entire War and Peace novel, and you say, okay, I'm going to look at 120 characters at a time. I'm going to encrypt that first 120 characters, but I'm going to use the exact same thing to encrypt the next 120 characters, and the exact same thing to encrypt the next 120 characters. And so eventually, eventually you've got a map. You can index out what each character will translate to based upon where its position is. So you've got a known plain text lookup. If you've ever know what was used to encrypt one thing, you can brute force the entire space. And, like for instance, I was a little inebriated one night playing in the DRBG CTF, and I wrote the defeat for it. It takes about 30 lines of code, and you've got a lookup. The Clipper chip. Anyone remember this thing? The great crypto wars of the 90s? The crypto chip was the idea that governments need to be able to access all communications. So if you use this Clipper chip, everything's going to be great because you'll be completely secure in your communications, and the government will have a backdoor into it in case you're doing something really bad. There's just a few problems with that. Number one was that it transmitted that information through something called the law enforcement access field. And the law enforcement access field contained everything you needed to decrypt the communication. The second part was that it only used 16 bits to protect it. And to go back, WEP uses 24 bits to protect it. So this is even worse. And then to make that even worse again, there was actually no integrity checks against what was being transmitted versus what you identified as, so you could actually send a different law enforcement access field with your transmission in real time, and it would go out just fine. And then even better, you could use somebody else's, and it would work. So really not a great system. And of course, it brings up a whole bunch of other issues that come into the crypto community every 10 to 15 years, is that if you have a backdoor, it's not just going to be the good guys using it. Someone's going to use it. So if you know there's a backdoor and you're not, say, in the US, which the US government pushed the Clipper chip, would you want to use the thing that they use that allows them access to all your communications? And if that is the case, doesn't that just push innovation and the solutioning, development, and money to other systems? Well, of course, the information security community responded rather aggressively, and it died within about 2 years. Another honorable mention, a lot more recent, Microsoft's Golden Key. Has anyone heard about this one? Just came out a couple months ago. So Microsoft's Golden Key was they had a legitimate need. They needed to test software deployments and OS installs on their devices. And so when you boot one of those devices, in this case, these were RT and ARM chipset devices, they did two things. They checked a policy, which had to be signed by Microsoft, and then they checked the operating system, which also had to be signed by Microsoft, which is great. I mean, that's a pretty decent secure system. But the problem is you don't want to make separate devices to test. So they all had this policy that was enabled or disabled by default that allowed you to skip that whole operating system check. And that was the golden key. It was made out to be a lot more than that, but that's really what it was. And so what happened was there was a debug policy that was still included in devices that were shipped to the stores, and somebody found it and said, hey, look, I can put Linux on a Microsoft Surface. Pretty cool. So presto, any OS on a Microsoft Surface, a Windows Phone, etc. Anything made from them that required that certificate signing. And then so many more. So we have WPA. WPA was the successor to WEP, and it made a whole bunch of the same mistakes, notably by using the same transmission key protection method. So didn't actually do anything much better there. Dual EC, the elliptic curve cryptography, where the NSA may or may not have paid somebody to select a particular curve, thus giving them everything they needed to reverse any selection for the cryptography. MD4, which mostly just failed at time, but was a very small key space. The NSP curves, again, ECC, but this time by design, they were off in their selection criteria again. Digital Encryption Standard. So when it first came out, the Digital Encryption Standard seemed like a great idea, except it was only 56 bits effective because they used 8 bits of what was supposed to be the crypto to protect it. And then they compounded the problem by doing 3DES, which went forward, backwards, forwards with DES, and in the process used those same bits again and again and again. So instead of 168 bits, you end up with 112, which is a very significant reduction. So I can go on about this forever, but I don't think everyone wants to hear that. The short version is crypto is really, really hard. If you do it right, you might get lucky and it'll work. If you do it wrong, it will fail, and people will find the failures. And so when you're selecting things, always be aware of what it is you're trying to accomplish. Don't roll your own crypto. Don't try and write your own crypto. Don't try and design some super secret thing that only you can figure out, because it will fall. If you're one of the absolute best and you're lucky, your system might survive for 10 years. And I think we too often come to this conclusion like, oh, it's encrypted, there's no way around it. Take a look at the Apple iPhone recently. Government can't get in, Apple says they can't get in. Go spend a bunch of money, and then a couple months later somebody says, $70, I can duplicate the chip and we can brute force it. I mean, this is what we've come to. So the short version is thank you for coming to my talk today. I just wanted to walk through some of these and explain some of the many, many things that I have fun playing with in my personal time. And if you have any questions, throw them at me. If I know the answer, you'll get it. If you don't, I'm going to answer anyways. It's going to be a complete lie, but then I'll tell you that I had no clue what I'm talking about.
So those are the fails. What's good?
Right now, for good, I'd put it at SHA-3 for integrity. I'd put it at SecAC for a secondary. Blowfish has performed very well and has variable costing, which makes it more difficult to brute force. That might be about all I'd put on that list right now. AES 128 or 256 are both considered fairly secure. And of course, the public key infrastructure, the underlying crypto for that is legitimate. But I'm not a cryptographer. Yes? Yes, quantum crypto is the technology whereby you open up a jump back into the past and you fix things, often in a very crazy, awesome 80s fashion. So quantum cryptography is kind of a cool idea. and it works. It's being used. The general principle is that if you have two things that are bound together, and I'll skip the quantum entanglement discussion, but just know that they exist in the same state no matter where they are. You get two things, you tie them together, so you make that one-time key pair, and then you separate it and use that to encrypt and decrypt everything as you go, which is great. And if you do anything, like say stick another device in line and try and read it, the very act of reading it changes the result. What that means is that by intercepting it, you provide an automatic notification that it's been intercepted. That was great up until about a year and a half ago when someone demonstrated a working bypass for it. So they found a way to basically induce a third item into an entangled state. So it's really cool stuff, way beyond my pay grade. If you know more, please. Hey, nice beard. You should shave that. Other questions?
Should have brought candy bars.
I should have brought candy bars. All right, well then we'll do a selfish call out. So one thing I would like to point out is that several people here will be at BSides DFW on November 5th. A friend and a good person in the community who goes by the name of Renegade was recently diagnosed with stage 3 cancer and is undergoing chemo, which is why you see me today with what I can only describe as a trailer park appearance, because we're all growing our hair out to shave it for charity at BSides DFW. So if any of you are coming to that, please either give us your dollars or your hair to help raise money for cancer research as well as for Renegade. That's everything I have.